What's wrong with my orange tree? The client says. Well, that's a very difficult thing to just come up with a straightforward answer, because you have to ask a lot of questions before you start jumping to any conclusions. That's probably the most important thing I can say to any arborist or any aspiring arborist. Don't jump to conclusions. Take a look. You may find something different than what you believe when you first get there. See, what happened is they were concerned because this citrus died. This was their tangerine. They said, well, something happened to my tangerine tree, and I want to make sure that the orange tree is doing well too. So I went over and took a look at the tangerine tree, and this was pretty clear cut. I leaned on it and it fell out of the ground. So there's still a bit of the stump in there, but you can see the condition of the wood. I mean, it was completely and totally rotted. Now you could say, well, why? There's a lot of things that could be a reason why. It could be sun scald, it could be animal damage, it could be physical impact, it could be over pruning. It could be so many things that you can't jump to conclusions and say, this is what killed the tree. Sometimes it's clear cut, but a lot of times, most of the time, it's a whole combination of problems. So let's get back to the orange tree. They called our city volunteers who second harvest, and they came out and took all the oranges. There's still a few up on the top, and she very kindly brought me a bag, and I'm going to climb up there and grab a little bit of bounty from this beautiful tree. But when you look at the tree, you can say, well, it looks pretty good to me. Overall, the tree has a nice fullness, nice volume of foliage. Well, let's go look at the foliage closely. I always look at the color of the leaves, and it's really important to know what the foliage of a particular plant is supposed to look like. Now, interestingly, there is a orange tree on the neighbor's yard over here. Let's see if we can see that one. Zoom up on that one. Now look at the color of the foliage over here, deep and dark green, and then come over here and it's very, very yellow. So there's a considerable difference in the way the foliage looks on possibly a healthier tree. I didn't really inspect that one, so I'm just guessing. And it's also important to look around the entire tree. You can look at the volume of the tree. Now it's producing lots and lots of fruit. It's going to have an abundant crop, possibly an overabundant crop. And a lot of times when I have a tree, especially a fruit tree that is in decline or is showing some signs of possible damage or possible weakness, I will oftentimes tell people to sacrifice the crop in favor of healthy foliage, because the plant only has so much to give. All right, it's putting everything that it's got out there to produce fruit first, and the foliage is what feeds the plant through the photosynthesis. So if you've got a plant that's declining in foliage, then you've got a sick plant. And it's really easy to say, it needs fertilizer or it needs water. Well, I'm really careful not to say that. I say, what have you been doing? What has the watering schedule of this plant been like? What is the soil like? Let's look at the base of the tree. Is this a soil that the water runs off on? Is this a soil that percolates really, really well? Well, according to the location, we're out in the Willow Glen area, the soil out here is generally pretty good. And the very first thing I always look at on any tree that I'm inspecting is the base. Because sometimes you'll have soil piled up around it, sometimes you'll have areas of damage. This one doesn't look too bad. You know, it may have a little bit of soil built up around it. It's always a good idea to pull back and see, because over time people keep adding mulch and keep raking into it, and the buildup can sometimes cause basal crown rot. I don't see any. Let's look further up the trunk. I do see something going on here. Now, what is that? I don't really know. I really don't know. Physical injury? There's some drying out up in here. All right, so we've got a little bit of something going on in here. What caused that? I don't know. Look at the top of this branch up here. Now I do know that citrus trees are susceptible to frost damage, and we had some pretty severe frosts back in the early 80s. 83 had a bad year, and a lot of citrus and frost sensitive plants succumbed to the hazard of the frost damage. So that could be associated with a past weather-related injury. It could have been somebody climbing up in the tree and scraping the bark off with hard-soled shoes. It could be anything. But you have to add up all the problems. So let's get back to the leaves, all right? Look at these yellow leaves here. Now that could be, sometimes that could be associated with too much water. It also could be a nitrogen deficiency, and sometimes in citrus trees, they like a little bit of iron. So those are what ifs. So what I did is I asked the client, I said, what has the history of this tree been? Well, this is interesting. Okay, I am looking at this branch, and what I just showed you over there told me that there was another citrus tree, but there's a camellia over here. Maybe I was looking at the green foliage of the camellia, which is very, very similar to the foliage of a citrus tree. And this side over here has got tons of oranges. All the oranges are still up there. It's a little bit heavy. They're getting a little old. I think that's where I'm going to probably pick from first. Leave enough for the neighbor there, of course. But the foliage on this limb looks better than the foliage on the rest of the tree. Now, that tells you something. So is it something going on up here? So if you see an individual part of the tree that's looking poorly and the rest of the tree looks better, then it may not be a nitrogen deficiency or a soil problem or even a water problem. It could be associated with a past injury, some decay, or whatever, what have you. Anyway, lots of what ifs. So I think I am going to make the recommendation. She told me that she hasn't fertilized this tree in years, so it's not going to hurt. But what will hurt is if they go buy a box of citrus fertilizer and just dump it out all over the ground. So you have to follow the directions, the volume of fertilizer, and don't fertilize the trunk. Fertilize the root system. Fertilize way out here. That's where all the absorption takes place. So watering is also going to be very critical. They do have some sprinklers down here, but she says they hardly ever go on. So I made the recommendation. We're in the heat of the summer now. It's middle of June. So I said deep water back here pretty good about every 3 weeks. I'm looking over at the neighbor's property. That's also an indicator. If that area looks really dry over there, you have to remember that the roots of this tree don't confine themselves just to this yard. They go other places. So it would behoove them to put the hose over there by the edge of the fence and let it kind of dribble out and water their part of the root system as well, because the tree needs it all. So if here's what I'm going to do. I've taken some images of this tree. I've asked her to follow these directions, and I will come back in about 3 months, and I'm going to come stand in the same spot, and let's see if we can see what the difference is. So if you're one of those people that are considering a career in arboriculture and think about what are some of the benefits of being an arborist, well, you reap the harvest of whatever is ripe, because almost all my clients say, take what you want. So I did.